From as far back as I can remember, there was always this weird tension hanging over our family, and it almost always had something to do with my cousin Sarah. I'm Emily, the youngest in the family. I have two older brothers, Mark and David, who are twins. Growing up, the three of us couldn't shake the feeling that our dad, Robert, cared more about Sarah than he did about us. I know that might sound immature, but it's hard not to feel like you're constantly playing second fiddle, especially when the person you're being compared to isn't even all that special. Sarah is a year younger than me, the only child of my Uncle Tom and Aunt Lisa. Naturally, her parents doted on her, that's to be expected. But the issue wasn't them, it was how obsessed my dad seemed to be with her. He'd shower her with gifts, give her all this attention, and constantly act like her happiness came before ours. It was like Mark, David, and I didn't matter as much, and that stung. When Sarah and I started school, we were placed in the same year even though I was older. That wasn't just coincidence, our dads pushed hard for it. They always tried to get us to spend as much time together as possible, and honestly, it never felt natural. Every morning, Dad made me get up extra early so we could swing by Uncle Tom's house to pick Sarah up before heading to school. I never understood why she couldn't just take the school bus like everyone else. If it had been just me, I could have slept in a bit longer. But anytime I asked about it, Dad would snap at me and say I needed to stop making a fuss and treat Sarah like my sister. It felt like my thoughts didn't matter at all, like I just had to go along with whatever he said. At school, Sarah always wanted me to hang out with her nonstop. She was quiet and didn't have many friends, but I had my own group and liked being with them. Sarah didn't like that one bit. Every afternoon when Dad picked us up, she'd tattle on me if I didn't spend lunch with her. And Dad? He'd scold me and say I needed to be nicer to my little sister. I just rolled my eyes. It seriously bothered me that he treated her like she was more important than his actual kids. Uncle Tom and Aunt Lisa never seemed to see anything off about it. Dad and Uncle Tom had always been close, they were just a couple years apart and practically grew up as a team. Since their own dad was barely around, Uncle Tom had stepped into that big brother role and taught my dad everything: riding a bike, shaving, fixing cars. Because of that bond, they always tried to mesh our families together. According to my brothers, Mom was never thrilled about spending so much time with Uncle Tom and Aunt Lisa, but she didn't have much of a choice. They were constantly dropping by. And when she tried to talk to Dad about it, he'd brush her off, saying family should be close and he enjoyed being with his brother. Mom didn't really mind Dad hanging out with Uncle Tom, it was Aunt Lisa that made her uncomfortable. She felt like she had to be nice to her just to keep the peace. But honestly, some people just don't click, and that was the case with Mom and Aunt Lisa. Mom thought she was too loud, talked way too much, and flirted with every guy in the room. It made things awkward, especially since Aunt Lisa and Uncle Tom had this open marriage back then. They were both allowed to sleep around, and Aunt Lisa made sure everyone, including my mom, heard all the juicy details. Mom thought it was wildly inappropriate, especially around kids, and always told us we shouldn't be hearing those things. That's why, whenever they came over, she'd send us outside to play with the neighborhood kids. Dad, on the other hand, didn't seem to care. He'd actually laugh at some of the stories Aunt Lisa told. The year Mom was pregnant with me, Aunt Lisa told her she wanted a baby too. But she and Uncle Tom had been struggling to conceive. Doctors said it might not be possible, which really tore them up. They fought a lot during that time and eventually agreed to open their marriage. But Aunt Lisa still wanted a baby of her own. Mom suggested other options: adoption, fertility treatments, though those things aren't cheap. Still, she told her that if they truly wanted a family, they'd figure something out. Then I was born. But things didn't go as planned. Mom died during childbirth from massive blood loss. My brothers told me it was one of the hardest times of their lives. They were devastated losing Mom, but also relieved that I made it through okay, something they believe she would have wanted. Dad, though, was completely shattered. He wouldn't leave her side. He just couldn't accept that she was gone. I can't imagine that kind of grief, but I'm grateful he never blamed me for it. I've always missed Mom, even though I never got to meet her. I only have photos and secondhand memories my brothers have shared. That first year after she passed was brutal for Dad and my brothers. None of them had experience caring for a baby girl, but they figured it out together. Dad stepped up, and my brothers helped however they could. The three of them have always had my back. Growing up, my brothers treated me like their little sidekick. I was always tagging along, whether they were playing video games or hanging out. I'd sit right between them, watching them play, and they never made me feel like a burden. If we had pizza, I got the biggest slice. If I needed the bathroom, they let me go first without complaint. Some girls have horror stories about their brothers, but not me. Mine are kind, patient, and sweet. We barely fought. I'd hear my friends complain about sibling drama, but I couldn't relate. The most intense argument we ever had was over what movie to watch, and we just voted and moved on. I've always known how lucky I am to have them. After Mom passed, Uncle Tom and Aunt Lisa became a constant presence. Thankfully, Aunt Lisa got pregnant a year after I was born, and everyone was thrilled. They knew how badly she wanted to be a mom. When Sarah came along, we were close in age, and the adults wanted us to be best friends. At first, it wasn't so bad, but when you're forced to hang out with someone all the time, it gets old real quick. Once school started and I found my own circle of friends, I didn't want to spend every moment with Sarah. But Dad and Uncle Tom expected me to keep an eye on her, always be her companion. The problem was, Sarah could be a handful. She cried easily, was super dramatic, and didn't know how to share. Being an only child, she was fiercely territorial about her stuff. Uncle Tom and Aunt Lisa never corrected her behavior, so it spilled over into school. She'd throw fits over little things, like if someone borrowed a pencil or disagreed with her, she'd literally throw herself on the floor. Other kids started avoiding her because of that. When she complained about being left out, her parents would just blame the teachers or other students instead of helping her adjust. And since I was always stuck with her, I started losing my patience. If she wanted to watch a certain show, we had to watch it even if I hated it. If she wanted to eat at a specific restaurant, I had to go along or deal with one of her meltdowns. It was exhausting. And then, one day, I had a birthday party to go to. The party invite had only been for me, not Sarah. But that didn't stop Aunt Lisa from cornering Dad and me that same day, insisting I take Sarah alone. She called me selfish for not wanting to include her. I'd already been getting into arguments with Dad lately, mostly because I was sick of always having to drag Sarah around with me. On top of everything else, Sarah had this really irritating habit: she'd flirt with the guys I liked. If she saw me talking to a boy, she'd swoop in, acting like we were sisters, and start telling embarrassing stories about me from when I was little like it was some cute comedy routine. One time, I had a crush on this guy named Ethan. We were starting to hit it off, chatting after school most days. Then one afternoon, Sarah saw us together and practically ran up, throwing her arm around me and going, "Hi, I'm Sarah, Emily's sister." It was so fake. And right after that, she launched into this ridiculous story about the time I accidentally wore pajamas to school because I'd been too tired to change. Ethan looked super uncomfortable. I was humiliated. I shot Sarah a glare, but she just gave me this smug little smile like she'd won something. That was the moment I started pulling away from her and from the whole dynamic. When my brothers graduated high school, they knew Dad hadn't saved much for college, so they worked hard to earn scholarships and still had to take out loans. I knew I'd have to do the same, so I buckled down. During my last 2 years of high school, I spent way less time hanging out and more time studying. Meanwhile, Sarah would constantly message or call, begging to hang out. I ignored most of it. She told me I was wasting my teenage years, always going on about how we should be out partying and enjoying life. Once, she even showed up at the library while I was studying, insisting I leave with her to go to some party. I told her I couldn't, I had studying to do and needed her to respect that. She rolled her eyes, called me a goody two-shoes, and stormed off like I'd just insulted her. I remember just sighing, trying to shake it off. Part of me felt a little guilty, but I knew I was doing the right thing for my future. When graduation came around, I got accepted into 2 solid universities. One of them happened to be in the same city where Sarah was going to school. My family basically expected me to choose that one. Sarah was over the moon about the idea. She kept gushing about us getting an apartment together, going to the same classes, living this super fun college sisterhood dream. Just thinking about it made my skin crawl. I didn't hate Sarah, but I definitely didn't want to be glued to her side for the next 4 years. So, I picked the other university, the one farther away. I didn't even consult Dad. I had the scholarship, I was taking out the loan, so it was my decision. When he found out, he flipped. He tried to pressure me into changing my mind. I stood my ground. I told him straight up it was my life, and I had every right to choose what I wanted. He said he was disappointed that I'd let something as petty as avoiding Sarah dictate my future. He called having a sibling like Sarah a blessing. That set me off. I reminded him that I did have siblings, Mark and David, and I loved them. I told him to stop forcing this false sisterhood with Sarah and accept that I was an adult making my own decisions now. Then came the guilt calls. Uncle Tom and Aunt Lisa called me personally, telling me how heartbroken Sarah was. How much she'd been looking forward to living with me. How college would be so much better for her if I were there. But I didn't care anymore. I was finally putting myself first, and I felt good about it. The day I was packing to move into my dorm, I heard Aunt Lisa's car pull into our driveway. Not totally out of the ordinary. Since my brothers had moved out, she would sometimes stop by to visit Dad or bring over food. Usually, I made sure to avoid her, but that day, I was still home. I quietly locked myself in my room, hoping Dad would assume I was napping or out running errands. I stayed silent, but I could hear them downstairs, laughing and chatting like everything was just peachy. Curiosity got the best of me. I cracked my door open and tiptoed over to listen. That's when I heard Dad mention something about a college fund. My ears perked up. I crept closer down the stairs to hear more. Dad told Aunt Lisa that he'd been setting aside money for Sarah's education for years. He said she wouldn't need loans, that he had everything covered. I froze. What was he talking about? He'd never mentioned a college fund to me or my brothers. Ever. Why would he be saving for Sarah and not for his own kids? I felt this wave of betrayal wash over me. I ran back upstairs and called my brothers. Asked if they knew anything about this. They were just as shocked as I was. They didn't believe it at first, but I told them exactly what I'd heard. The three of us tried to make sense of it. But no matter how we spun it, it didn't add up. And then something just clicked in my mind. I knew I could be totally honest with my brothers, so I said it. Do you think, is it possible Sarah is Dad's daughter? There was a pause. David jumped in quickly, saying there was no way. But Mark stayed quiet. And when David asked what he was thinking, Mark admitted that the idea had crossed his mind before. He said he always thought it was strange how Dad acted with Sarah. And yeah, Sarah looked more like us than she did Uncle Tom, with her dark brown hair like Dad's, not the blonde hair Tom had. I know that stuff doesn't always mean anything. Genetics can be weird, but it wasn't just about looks. It was about how Dad treated her. It always felt off. That's when I decided I needed to know the truth. I told my brothers I was going to get some of Sarah's hair and order a DNA test. They weren't thrilled with the idea, but they understood. They warned me to be careful, make sure nobody found out. So that week, I texted Sarah, asked her to hang out. When we were together, I discreetly grabbed a hair that had fallen on her jacket. I felt guilty, like I was doing something sneaky and wrong, but I had to know. Waiting for the results was torture. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I was terrified. Because if the test confirmed what I thought, everything would change. And then the results came in. It said Sarah was my half-sister. We had the same father. I just stood there staring at the paper, feeling the ground shift beneath me. I was overwhelmed, angry, hurt, confused. My brain couldn't even process it. My dad had lied to us for years. And I hated myself for not putting the pieces together sooner. Looking back, it was obvious. Dad and Aunt Lisa always had this strange closeness. The fact that Sarah was born just a year after I was, it made me nauseous. That meant Dad had slept with his brother's wife not long after Mom died. Just thinking about it made my stomach turn. Suddenly, all of it made sense. Why Dad pushed me to be with Sarah constantly, even when I needed space. Why he acted like her happiness was more important than ours. I called my brothers, crying. They immediately knew something was wrong. When I told them Sarah was our half-sister, there was this heavy silence. I sent them photos of the DNA results so they could see for themselves. Mark and David were livid. They said they were coming home right away to confront Dad, to demand answers. But I told them it wouldn't make a difference. Nothing we said would erase what happened. Dad slept with Aunt Lisa, and Sarah was the result. That was the reality now. And no amount of yelling would change that. I told my brothers we should cut off contact with Dad. The man had done nothing for us, not when it really mattered. We had to figure out how to pay for college on our own, racking up student loans, while he secretly saved up for the child he had with another woman. Mark agreed without hesitation. David, though, was still processing it all. He seemed stunned. Now that we knew the truth, I felt like we couldn't just keep it to ourselves. Something had to be done. I wanted to let Sarah know calmly, quietly, but in a way Dad couldn't ignore. I asked my brothers not to say anything to him just yet. I asked them to be the ones to drive me to college on move-in day because I didn't want to ride with Dad. They agreed immediately. So when the day came, I invited Sarah over to say goodbye. She showed up bright and chipper, and of course, Dad was over the moon like always. He gave her this big, affectionate hug while she launched into a speech about her new apartment and how her mom had told her about the college fund that had been saved up for her for years. I just smiled politely, but inside, I wanted to scream. I knew exactly where that money came from. Sarah was beaming, going on about how amazing it was that her mom had saved thousands so she wouldn't have to take out loans like I did. I bit my tongue and kept my face neutral, even though I felt 1,000 things at once. That's when my brothers pulled into the driveway. The second they stepped out of the car, you could feel the tension. They didn't greet Dad. They didn't make eye contact. He tried talking to them, but they brushed him off. That wasn't like us. We'd always been polite to our father, but after what we'd discovered, none of us could even look at him the same way. While they packed my things into the car, I helped quietly. Once everything was loaded, I turned to say goodbye. Dad reached out to hug me, but I stepped back before he could. He looked confused, even hurt, and asked if something was wrong. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I wish Mom were here." His face fell. He looked like he didn't know what to say. I didn't care anymore. After the kind of betrayal he kept buried for years, I didn't know him anything, not even my anger. I held in everything I wanted to scream. I gave Sarah a quick hug and slipped an envelope into her hand. I told her to open it in front of Dad after I left. She gave me a curious look but nodded, said goodbye, and waved as we drove off. As we pulled away, I knew what I'd done would blow everything up. But it needed to happen. Sarah deserved to know the truth about her mom and about my dad. Just in case, I also sent a photo of the DNA results to Uncle Tom. He deserved to know, too. Not even 30 minutes later, my phone started blowing up. Aunt Lisa was calling. Dad too. My brothers' phones were lighting up as well. But none of us answered. Then Uncle Tom called. And this time, I picked up. He got right to the point. Is the test real? I felt this wave of sadness, and I told him I wished it wasn't. I explained how the truth had shattered everything we believed about our dad. Uncle Tom was quiet for a few seconds, and then he asked if I was okay. The worry in his voice hit me hard, and that's when I broke down crying. Uncle Tom had always meant a lot to us. And now I was the one who had to tell him something that would destroy his world. But even though he was clearly heartbroken, he stayed calm. He comforted me. He told me I did the right thing and that none of this was my fault. And he thanked me for being honest. Now that I'm at college and my brothers are off on their own, I've had time to really sit with all of this. And I keep wondering, did I do the right thing? It feels like I caused all this chaos. Sometimes I catch myself asking, am I the bad guy for telling the truth? Update 1. Since everything came out, our whole family has been turned upside down. It's been nothing short of a disaster. I found out that Sarah and Uncle Tom moved out of their house almost immediately. They want nothing to do with Aunt Lisa anymore. Aunt Lisa, for her part, has completely lost it. She's been bombarding me with texts, some of them filled with venom, others oddly defensive. In one message, she actually tried to justify what she did with my dad. In another, she accused me of ruining her marriage, saying it was my fault. She even wrote that my mom would be disappointed in me, that I was just trying to tear everyone apart. As for my dad? Nothing. Total radio silence. Not a single call, not one text. And honestly, that's fine by me. There's nothing he could say that would ever make this right. To everyone who reached out or said something supportive, thank you. Deep down, I know exposing the truth was the right thing to do. But that doesn't make the guilt any easier to carry. I never wanted to break my family apart. I just couldn't live with the lie anymore. Update 2. Some people have told me I should call Sarah and apologize. But I've decided not to. I don't hate her, she'll always be my cousin in my mind, not my half-sister. I was forced to treat her like a sister for so long, to play with her, protect her, always be there. And yeah, maybe that built up some resentment over the years. But I genuinely wish her well. I hope she can move on and find peace. Others have told me I should listen to my dad's side of the story. But honestly, why would I? Imagine if your parents secretly slept with their sibling's spouse and had a child, then spent years pretending everything was fine, making you bond with that kid just to cover it up. Would you be okay with that? Because I'm not. I've thought about it long and hard, and I've made my decision. I can't forgive that kind of betrayal. I won't. Update 3. And Uncle Tom and Sarah recently visited me at college. I was nervous to see them again, but the moment Uncle Tom hugged me, some of that anxiety faded. Sarah and I exchanged polite hellos, but it was tense. We sat down to talk. Uncle Tom told me he's cut off all contact with my dad since everything came out. It hurt to hear, but it wasn't surprising. The affair destroyed everything. He also told me he's divorcing Aunt Lisa. When I showed him the awful messages she'd been sending me, he got furious. He snapped pictures of them and said his lawyer would handle it. Turns out, he'd already hired a divorce attorney. Uncle Tom said he couldn't stay with someone who betrayed him like that. I understood. Completely. Then Sarah spoke up. She asked how I was doing in school. I told her I was managing okay. She asked if I already knew the college fund had been set up by my dad. I told her yes, that I'd heard the conversation the day her mom came over to our house. That's what first made me suspicious. Then she told me something I didn't expect. She had returned every last cent of that money to my father and asked him to never contact her again. She said the whole situation made her feel sick, and she couldn't accept anyone else as her father. I told her I respected that decision. Especially since Dad still hadn't owned up to what he did, not even a single apology. Uncle Tom looked like he wanted to explode. He said the night he found out, he drove to my dad's house ready to beat him senseless. But Sarah stopped him. And because he loved her so much, he didn't go through with it. Otherwise, he said, my dad wouldn't be alive right now. I believed him. The pain he must have felt raising a child only to discover your own brother is the real father, it's the deepest kind of betrayal there is. After we talked, I felt more confident in my decision to go no contact with Dad. As for me and my brothers, we're still tight. The three of us are a team, and we always will be. We talk all the time and are even planning to get jobs in the same city so we can live close again. Whatever happens next, at least I know I'm not alone.